Okay, so many of you may have heard the headline about Naftali Bennett flying to Moscow on Saturday to meet with Vladimir Putin. And just take a snippet of that story. And of course, it's here we're trying to have some Jewish analysis and Torah content and not get into the politics of Israel's response. There's certainly a lot to be said about it. You can read Natan Sharansky's op-ed on the subject, and plenty of others who can discuss that. But this is taken from Israel National News, Israeli website also called Arutz Sheva. The headline was, "Why was no photo taken of Bennett and Putin in Moscow?" Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's flight to Moscow on Shabbat, the Jewish day of rest, was unusual in many ways. Bennett, who identifies as a religious Jew, was accompanied by Housing and Construction Minister Zev Elkin, who was also observant, and the two used their time mid-flight to recite Shabbat morning prayers. According to Ari Kalman of B'chadrei Haredim, upon landing in Moscow, Bennett and Elkin took a few minutes interlude to conduct an abbreviated Shabbat meal with challah that Elkin had brought with him from Jerusalem. So talk about, your Shabbos morning activities, davening on the plane and Kiddush on the tarmac. It's kind of interesting to say the least. According to a report on Channel 13 News, no photograph of Prime Minister Naftali Bennett together with Russian President Vladimir Putin was taken at their meeting on Shabbat, as Bennett did not want to be photographed on the Jewish day of rest. So that's a little bit of the news, and giving us some of a religious slant, because that was that's Israel National News is also a religious news site, and it gave us a little bit of some of the news that the Haredim were reporting, and so that's that's the headline that will get us started. Now, I imagine that many are familiar with the fact that, for the most part, Israeli prime ministers publicly maintain a level of Jewish observance. Officially, any meals that they eat in a public, like at a state dinner or the like, are supposed to be kosher. They don't have meetings or travels on Shabbat. There was a case last year of Bennett coming and getting stuck in Washington over Shabbat and making a nice Shabbos with his staff and the journalists. Naftali Bennett, as we've discussed before, is the first overtly identifying Orthodox prime minister. Others have been more traditional, some have been less traditional, but he's a kippah wearer who is someone who is personally observant. So that adds to the the drama when things like this take place. And that was the story. There's the geopolitical component of what was he doing, and then there's also now the Jewish reaction of what he was doing. And I thought that we are not really able to solve the overall geopolitical situation. You follow the news, and we can pray for an outcome. We can respond, we can help, we can donate, all different types of ways that we can be involved personally. And I've spoken and shared messages about that in other forums. But here I wanted to look at kind of this Jewish reaction, the Jewish side of things. It was the Prime Minister of Israel. He was traveling on Shabbat. Clearly, there was a sense of this is pikuach nefesh. There are people who are in danger that travel might be able to assist. And therefore, Shabbat takes a back seat in order to try and save, trying to save lives. So that was the motivation seemed to be traveling on Shabbat, saving lives wins. I wanted to look at just some of the issues surrounding war in general, this war in particular, for that some Jewish sources might inform us about, using some of the stories that we're reading, and to see if there's kind of a religious, Jewish law or thought underpinning to them. Just in general, we're standing the week where we're going to read Parshat Zachor, which describes the first battle that the Jewish nation fought against Amalek. It is the enemy, the eternal enemy of the Jews. It's this battle between good and evil. There's a war. There are casualties. We know that there are rules of war within Jewish law. We know that everyone, all the able-bodied had to serve in the war, and if those were afraid what they would do, there's a whole hierarchy of those who could be exempt and those who would exempt themselves. We take it very seriously. We know this interface between Jewish law and war and practicalities has emerged, especially in the state of Israel, whether it be the fact that to run a state according to Jewish law requires a whole recognition of the fact that there have to be exceptions, in Israel with regards to the Israeli army who serves, but leaving aside the whole who's can be exempt, because there are plenty of people who end up not serving, most notably in the ultra-Orthodox and Arab communities. They don't serve the same way as other demographics within the country. But for example, there's the famous Hezder Arrangement. Hezder, which actually means arrangement. It was an arrangement made that allows for yeshiva students to combine yeshiva study and military service. That also has its own unique dealing with the realities of army service and the ideals of maintaining religious observance and adherence and commitment to Torah study. So this is not something that the warrior scholar, the religious war, the idea of halacha entering the battlefield is not new, but today's situation is, and especially if we're going to try to apply it. What does Judaism, Jewish law, Talmudic sources say about other wars or non-Jewish wars? What, if anything, that can inform our understanding? So, what does the Talmud say about non-Jewish laws, non-Jewish wars? So source number one, Shavuot 35b, Shmuel says, a monarchy that kills one of every 6 individuals in the world is not punished for doing so, as that is the prerogative of a monarch. The idea within the recognizing that there is a certain power that a king has, and a king has can take certain liberties, and one of them is fight wars, and one of them is to send people to their deaths and to kill people in war. And there seems to be a recognition that war is hell, and that people will die, maybe even innocent people will die in war. And that's not excused or okay, but that king is not punished for doing so, because there are going to be casualties. There's always going to be death. Anytime there's war, there's going to be death, and that's something that has to be understood and recognized. We shouldn't tolerate it, but therefore the Talmud has the statement that people are going to die, and that's not considered evil or actionable or punishable, because that's the reality of war. Now, who's listening to this Talmudic statement? The likelihood is any of the monarchs throughout history who have started wars are not looking into the Talmud for their instructions, but this does tell us something about how the rabbis of our tradition recognize that there's going to be casualties when there's going to be war. The Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, a seminal figure in turn of the 20th century Jewish law and thought and commentary. So he's commenting on the verses in Bereshit in chapter 9 that make murder forbidden, right? People are not allowed to kill other people. It's one of the 7 Noachide laws. Murder is a violation of God's order. And so it says, if you do so, then there will be consequences. So the Netziv says, it's in the Hebrew and we'll translate, that when is a person punished for murder? When they should have been at peace. B'shah she'ra'ui linhog ba'achva. Right, all things equal, people should get along in brotherhood. Masha ein came b'shas milchama, ve'es lisno, not in times of hatred or war. Az es laharov ve'ein onish al zeh klal. Then it's time to hate, and then there will be death, and there will not be punishment because of those deaths. Ki kach nosad ha'olam. This is the natural order. And then he quotes the Gemara in Shavuot, right, that we just mentioned as well. right? That even though there will be people who die, and even he says, Melech Yisrael muter lasos milchemet hareshut af al gav shekamim Yisrael yehargu al yedesa. And sometimes wars will involve Jewish battles and Jewish casualties. This is, essentially, war is hell is not just a statement. It's built into the rabbinic understanding of the way of the world. People will die, and that's not going to be considered murder, and that's not going to be something that there will be punishment of. It's something that will affect the world. So, again, this is something that may depress us. This may be something that, why shouldn't we be more aspirational for peace? Right. This is something that can be asked. If you look in the blessing of the Shmoneh Esrei that we say every day, it's about our enemies. It talks about let our enemies be completely wiped off the face of the earth. And someone asked the question, why can't we be more positive? Why can't we be like, let our enemies turn into our friends? Like, why does it have to be so? Why do we have to be so cruel? Why do we have to be so negative? And the answer is that it's not negativity; it's the reality, the reality of the Jewish nation from that first battle when the Amalekites attacked us on the way out of Egypt. Has been one that, yes, we aspire for peace, but there's also the realities of war and violence. And I think that these sources are coming out of that reality. So the Jewish sources, Talmud, Rambam, Jewish law talks about different types of war, what's called an obligatory war, a milchemes mitzvah, which is the war that is fought to conquer the land of Israel or against Amalek. Then there's what's called milchemes reshus. This is the optional war. An optional war isn't sort of, hey, let's go to war because we want to, but it doesn't have that same religious definition or obligatory definition. Rambam references these in source number 3 in the Laws of Kings and Wars, right? The king does not go to fight other than a war of mitzvah. What is a war of mitzvah? This is against the 7 nations, or the war against Amalek, or a war to assuage Israel of a persecutor. After this, he may fight a discretionary war. That's the reshus, which are those wars he conducts against other nations in order to enlarge the borders of Israel and increase his renown and reputation. But notice that what is considered a war of mitzvah? To assuage Israel of a persecutor. If the Jewish nation is being attacked, is being assaulted, then this is categorized as a war of mitzvah. So, if we go back to that initial statement, war is hell. Well, it doesn't matter if it's mitzvah, if it's reshus. Well, Talmudic law and Torah law, has certain definitions, and at certain times in our history, we were utilizing. We just finished reading about the Mishkan and all of its accoutrements. Right, the Urim V'Tumim, they would ask the Kohen Gadol, who would have a divine message of what should happen. But these sources have also been utilized, especially since 1948, with regards to, for example, the War of 67, or to discuss, what is the Judaism and Halacha say about a preemptive war. Right? Most of our wars are when there's a mitzvah or when there's to protect. What about a preemptory war? This has been something that rabbis have studied with regards to the Lebanon War in 1982. What was the nature of that war? 1967, many are very familiar with the situation. The armies massing on the borders, closing of the Straits of Tiran. Is it an act of war? Israel struck first, but was a response to an act of war. 1982 was couched in the political military establishment as having a similar motivation to protect Israel against the terrorists, against Yasser Arafat and the PLO. It went a little sideways. And without going through the history, there was various controversies. Some of Israel's allies in South Lebanon, its Christian allies, did some bad things. But these are sources which have provided some guidance and some foundation for how the religious response to some of Israel's battles. I think that most of the time, if we're in danger, someone tries to kill you, you kill them first. Right? That's the classic law of the rodef, right? The pursuer. Right? If someone's coming to get you, you hashkem v'hargo, you get them first. Now, even within the laws of the rodef, there are certain rules and regulations. Right? If someone is pursuing you, you can stop them. But what about bystanders? You don't have permission to, stop them by something that will harm innocent bystanders. So these are these definitely very much are the springboard for a conversation as to the various military engagements that we've even seen in the last 70, 80 years, how they can be understood through traditional Jewish sources. And the Rambam says that there is a mitzvah when there's a persecutor against Jews, right? To assuage Israel of a persecutor. And again, what does it mean to be a persecutor against Jews? What about, are they in physical danger? Are they in danger of death? So here, Rabbi Herschel Schachter from Yeshiva University has a caveat which, basically puts together any time that there's danger to be considered time of war. Source number 4 in the Hebrew will translate V'nira pashut lo rak milchemes hit gonenut shel pikuach nefesh mamush. It's not only when there's a type of trying to defend against literal, actual threat of death, right? Shari l'bnei Noach, is this considered something that even non-Jews can engage in? Remember, the sources that we were seeing in Shavuot, Nitziv was not talking just about Jewish war, but also non-Jewish wars. Non-Jews can't murder either. War means it's not murder, and he's saying it's not just when there's threat to life and limb, actually. If it's to protect the land and their birthright, right, their national identity. If the Russian army would come to America, and their troops would surround Washington, D.C., it's interesting the cities that Rav Schachter chooses, but maybe they surround Scranton, Pennsylvania, or Paramus. You may choose Paramus because Rav Schachter was once a rabbi in Paramus. Let's say they were just surrounding these cities to show their superiority, and they were not threatening anybody, whether with death or with any bodily injury. Only so that they can then they can annex these cities to be part of their country, right? So these cities, now that they're being surrounded, there's a siege against Scranton, Pennsylvania, so that Scranton will be annexed and become part of Russia, not part of America, right? It's certainly permitted for Americans to fight a battle to defend Scranton and Paramus, to remain part of America, not to become part of Russia. And this seems to be obviously minhag ha'olam kayadua, the well-known principles in place in the world. Right, so if you kind of take that over to what's taking place in Ukraine, what's taking place is you have the soldiers surrounding it, wanting to make it part of another country. That's war, and you can fight back and you can defend, and any of the casualties involved. That's not improper to fight along those lines. So just some the idea of war, how we understand war. Talmudic and halachic sources talk about war being hell and war being a time when you could fight and people will be killed. And what defines a war? Well, if there's a persecution, and even not persecution in contemporary times, where Schachter says it seems to be understood that if a country wants to take over your country, even if they don't want to hurt you, they just want to cow you into submission, you can fight back. So just the idea that that battles and these types of struggles and conflicts, even over a national identity, would seem to rise to the level of a war from a halachic perspective. Questions, comments before we look at a couple of kind of case studies and how they're playing out these days from a Jewish perspective in the Ukraine. All right, and if there's anyone here from Paramus or from Scranton, you should always stand up and defend your homeland. So, obviously, we're seeing all of the what's taking place in terms of all the refugee crisis, and what's taking place there is a humanitarian tragedy, and it's impacting the Jewish community in particular because many people connect to that part of the world, and there is a large Jewish community that's there, and many Jewish organizations are active, whether they be social service organizations or religious organizations, as Chabad has numerous outposts there, and other organizations. So there's something that's on our radar screens that we're paying close attention to, and that's something that how can we help, and we should be able to. What can we do? And in the case in source number 5, there was an understanding that look, there's something there that that some people were called upon to do. So this is a news article that was making its way in the Orthodox Jewish news outlets. Askanim near Ukraine may answer phones on Shabbos. Askanim is the term utilized for those who are community activists, right, lay leaders. So new psak halacha has been issued permitting askanim in countries that border Ukraine to answer their phones on Shabbos. Rosh Shlomo Feivel Zimmerman, Rosh Av Bezdin of Badatz, London, said that those people assisting Ukrainian Jews to flee may answer calls that involve helping refugees. Here is the text. The ongoing war in Ukraine has presented a clear and present danger to life for almost anyone in Ukraine. It has become apparent there are Jewish people situated in Ukraine in areas that border Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Moldova, and Poland, who are reluctant to flee to these neighboring countries due to concerns that they will have nowhere to stay when they arrive there. Community activists in these countries may be able to reassure these people that they will be taken care of if they flee endangered areas. In response to a shaila posed by community askanim in those border countries, it is beyond doubt that they may keep their phones on over Shabbos and may immediately answer their phones on Shabbos. If there's a chance they'll be able to facilitate in this way the safety of those who need to flee the danger zones. Indeed, it is an obligation on them to do so. Thinking being that the people who were fleeing, knowing that there's someone on the other side who would be able to help them, whether it be to these people to facilitate those arrangements or to reassure them that there will be ways for them to be taken care of, answer the phone. And that was, it's not only that it's permitted, but it's an obligation on them to do so. So this is similar to, this is pikuach nefesh, and it shows that pikuach nefesh isn't only about saving a physical life, but it's the whole process that is involved in potentially saving lives. Going back to Naftali Bennett's decision to travel on Shabbos, right? What did he accomplish? Did he accomplish anything at all? We can have all those types of questions on a geopolitical level, but from a halachic perspective, is it pikuach nefesh? Well, we see that here's another example that yes, pikuach nefesh is anything that goes into the process of facilitating the possible saving of an individual. The idea that when pikuach nefesh comes into tension, into conflict with Shabbos, so sometimes the question is so kind of, are we being lenient on Shabbos? Are we is it that Shabbos is less important? And no, the answer is not being lenient on Shabbos. We're being just more strict on trying to save a life. And the idea that it's something that should be done, and individuals you shouldn't pass this on. You shouldn't let's have the answering service take care of it, or take the message or call them back. What should be done is whatever is necessary. And in this respect, in the halachic conversation, this very often Reb Chaim Brisker is invoked. Reb Chaim Brisker, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, Rabbi Brisk, a colleague and contemporary of the Netziv, also the grandfather Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, and so therefore he's often known as being someone who cared very much about pikuach nefesh, doing whatever was possible to help people in need in general. Right? He once said that when he passed away, he didn't want a fancy rabbinic matzeva. He didn't want a fancy rabbinic tombstone. He wanted just to say the words Rav Chesed, Rabbi of Kindness. But he was known as someone who was very careful about and demanding that pikuach nefesh, life and health, well-being, take precedence. So this is a well-known story, and it was told by Rabbi Menachem Genack last October 2020, and I think it was told in connection to how people are responding to COVID and the importance of life taking precedence. But he tells the story, well known, that Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, source number 6, perhaps the greatest rabbi of his time, was extremely meticulous about pikuach nefesh. Reb Chaim's grandson, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, recounted an episode that took place one Shabbos when he was ill as an infant. Reb Chaim asked the doctor if it would help to have more light, to which the doctor gave a non-committal response. Reb Chaim immediately instructed his oldest son, Reb Moshe, to turn on the light. When Reb Moshe hesitated, Reb Chaim called him an Amaretz. He said, ignoramus. There's another version of the story that says he slapped him. And Reb Simcha Zelig, the rabbi, the Dayan of Brisk, immediately turned on the light. When Reb Chaim was accused of being lenient about Yom Kippur, he said he wasn't lenient about Yom Kippur, but stringent about pikuach nefesh, or the idea that of protecting life. So I think that when we talk about what are the ways to apply pikuach nefesh, well, if a person can be helpful, then pikuach nefesh is doche, and whether that's flying to Moscow, whether that's answering the phone, whatever the situation is, there's the idea of pikuach nefesh, saving a life, takes precedence. So that certainly is an application of this in times of war. This is something that can come up, has come up, in as part of a larger value of human life, which is strange. We also recognize that war is hell and there will be death, but we also do what we can to preserve life. Questions are on the pikuach nefesh element. So now I want to talk about, you see there's a picture that's very famous of a father and son who are volunteering for the Ukrainian army. And and it stands out. The picture is, you got this father with the white beard. It looks like the Rebbe is going off to fight for the Ukrainian army. But, this is an Orthodox father and son. Soldiers are ready to kill Russian soldiers. Until just a few months ago, David Cherkassky was finishing a degree in cybersecurity, praying at Chabad synagogue, and posting selfies from his travels across the Jewish world. Now he's standing by in his hometown of Dnipro, Ukraine, ready to kill Russian soldiers. 20-year-old Hasidic Jew and his father, Asher, among a force of 400 Ukrainian troops, poised to try to repel an attack on the eastern Ukraine city. One of several Russian troops are expected to stage combat in the coming days. Father and son are part of the Territorial Defense Force, a civilian army that Ukrainian leaders hope will help the military push back against what is proving to be a full-scale air and land Russian attack. Cherkassky's are members of the Jewish community of the Dnipro group run by Chabad, but David said he could imagine one satisfying detour from his hometown. I want to go all the way to Moscow and shoot Putin myself if I could. Cherkassky said there are at least 2 other Jews in his battalion, and his Jewish identity, he said, is a non-issue for his fellow fighters. Everyone is ready to fight. It doesn't make a difference if you're Jewish or not. No one is thinking about that. Cherkassky said, adding that his Jewish identity didn't cause him problems before the war either. He said he has no time to eat and just has some sips of an energy drink when he's famished. Cherkassky tries to adhere to Jewish law, but admits that keeping Shabbat might be difficult in wartime circumstances. So here you have an observant father-son, not the only ones who are joining to fight for Ukraine. You see what emerges for the observant soldier, has to deal with issues of kosher, issues of Shabbat. Very famously, the Chafetz Chaim, right? Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin, the famed scholar of Jewish law, and one who very much focused on speaking properly, not talking lashon hara. Right, so he lived a very long life. He died in his mid-90s and 1930s. So he was writing. One of the books that's less well known is he wrote a book of how the Jewish soldiers should behave during their military service, because the Eastern European Jews were forced into military service in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, and he wrote a book to try and provide encouragement and guidance when there's no kosher, when there's no Shabbos, how this will play out. And we see that to this day in Eastern Europe, you have soldiers who are thinking about the same thing. Those are Ukrainians who live in the Ukraine. What about volunteering? What about a Jew to volunteer to fight in a foreign military? So, source number 8, Israelis travel to Ukraine to fight for what is right. Dozens of Israelis of Ukrainian origin are making their way to their ravaged country of birth, and not just to offer humanitarian aid. They're leaving behind families, work, and safely take up arms against the Russian invasion. They cross the Polish border, meet comrades, and head to the front line, willing to risk death for the freedom of Ukraine. What makes Israelis put their lives on the line for the sake of the country they left many years ago? Mikhail Retinsky was born in Kharkiv. City has been destroyed by Russian artillery and airstrikes. He arrived at the Polish border on Monday. Many thousands of Ukrainian refugees are living in tents in the freezing cold, having escaped the horrors of war. Leaving Israel to fight in what seems to be the war between Russia and the global West is not something extremely bizarre, he says. You have to stand up for what is right, he smiles, adding that even his wife, who was originally strongly against him joining the fight, eventually understood why he was doing this. Right, Sergei Novitsky was born in Kiev. He immigrated with his family, served in the IDF. I have a chance to fight for my country. I had a chance to fight for my country. Now it's time to defend those in Ukraine, right? Israel's his country, but now he's defending Ukraine. And then there are also, the last sentence, there are also native-born Israelis without Ukrainian roots, but who feel solidarity with Ukrainian people who are ready to leave for the front lines. So what kind of, what's the Jewish approach to something like this? You know, this idea, what are they defending, right? Then you notice that these individuals who are not currently living in the Ukraine are not saying it's necessarily about saving a life, but it's the right thing to do, or it's defending other people in need, or it's it's to help those who need helping, right? I decided to help, or it's the right thing to do. So, do we have any kind of, what does Judaism say about the right thing to do? So we know that Judaism says you're supposed to do the right thing. Time and again, in the book of Devarim, it says, "V'yasisa hayashar v'hatov," do what's right. But how does that apply to something like this and taking the risks to go fight a battle in a foreign country? So Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik wrote a number of letters and a decision relating to serving in the U.S. military, and in particular, when there was a call for chaplains, right? Especially in wartime, World War II was one thing, Korea again, Vietnam again, right? There was an arrangement with the rabbinical seminaries to provide chaplains for the military. And as you can imagine, it wasn't necessarily the most popular endeavor, and therefore there was some reluctance and resistance, and some of the students were saying, we don't want to participate. But but it was mandatory, and so Rabbi Soloveitchik addressed why this was appropriate and necessary from a halachic perspective. That if you are a rabbinical student, you have to participate in this draft and in this rotation to serve as a chaplain, or potentially serve as a chaplain to defend the country. So this is source number 9 from the book Covenant, Community, and Commitment. We must note that our decision is not primarily an expression of a pragmatic utilitarian approach, but reflects a halachic historic tradition which has always wanted to see the Jew committed to all social and national institutions of the land of his birth or choice, which affords him all the privileges and prerogatives of citizenship. Particularly, the halacha emphasizes the duty of the Jew to share in the defense of his homeland in the way in which he is best fitted. Since we as rabbis cannot participate in the physical defense effort, the only way in which we're able to serve our country is to offer counsel and spiritual comfort to those who are called upon to serve this great physical task. Let us remember that the burden they carry is by far a heavier one than ours. So here is Rabbi Soloveitchik explaining the obligation, not pragmatic utilitarian, but halachic historic, to be a part of standing up for the freedoms that this country represents. So he's talking about citizens and he's talking about this country, but the concept of standing up for freedom as a value is something that does resonate within the Jewish tradition. This idea of patriotism being of a religious value is there. So Ukrainians from outside wanting to go back can be an extension of this, and maybe those who feel the desire to fight for those whose freedom is being taken away. Getting back to the fact that it's war when another country wants to annex or take over the national identity of another country. So I don't think that Rabbi Soloveitchik would say there's an obligation for people to step up, but the desire to do so is not just a secular value, it's also a religious value. questions, comments on the volunteering for Ukraine and this idea of religious value of patriotism. Okay, so wanted to look at just, there's certainly, been kind of a conversation as to, what's the role, it's a country that was never, Ukraine was never a country that was, warm and welcoming to the Jews. And the fact that they now have a Jewish president is something fascinating. I refer you to Ruth Weiss's op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal, who specifically addresses that. But some people are saying, oh, that country has been terrible to the Jews. So just an interesting data item. Washington Post had a piece on this yesterday. Right, for many Jews, Ukraine brings up memories of pogroms, anti-Semitism, and Nazi collaboration, but Jewish life in Ukraine is no longer what it was. So just, it highlighted a 2017 Pew Research study, source number 10, that found that Ukraine was the most accepting of Jews among all Central and Eastern European countries. Only 5% of Ukrainians in the survey said that they would not accept Jews as fellow citizens. That's, Baruch Hashem, there's only 5% who will not accept us as citizens. Interesting, in neighboring Russia, it was 14%. In Poland, where everyone's fleeing, 18%. In Romania, 22%. So it's just an interesting data point. Now, the fact, what people answer on surveys, for anyone who's been paying attention to surveys these last several years, they sometimes mean absolutely nothing. But the fact that things change, and while once again Amalek is reminded that we never forget, we also have to deal with the reality that as things change over time. And so here so this was an article about what's happening in Uman. Right, source number 11, in a synagogue turned bunker, Ukrainian Jews opened doors to all people. As air raid sirens blared in the small Ukrainian city of Uman, 125 miles south of capital Kyiv, families crowded to a makeshift bomb shelter underneath the central synagogue. Before Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine last week, the basement of the people was used as a bathhouse for Jewish worshipers to do their ritual washing, or mikveh, before prayers. But now the synagogue of the Breslover Hasidim is opening its doors to all locals looking for shelter from the threat of Russian troops. We invite all the people, all Ukrainians, all Hasidic people, doesn't matter who, said Irina Ribnitskaya, a lawyer for the US-owned foundation that runs the synagogue. We prepare this place especially for them in order to hide them where there is an alarm. It's safe to be here, that's why I'm here, said Dasha Borscht. I can't think of a better last name for someone Ukrainian, a non-Jewish resident, to be taking refuge in the basement. This idea of who would have expected that one of this role reversal, a country that was inhospitable, now the Jews who are in that country are opening up their doors and their synagogues for anyone in need. So along these lines, in terms of people fleeing, there's also the refugee crisis, right? The numbers are, astronomical in terms of how quickly, it was a couple 100,000. Now we're already approaching 2 million, with up to 1 million children in the count. So, obviously, a refugee crisis in the countries that take them in is a very complicated issue. In particular, let's look at what it means for Israel. And Israel, as a Jewish state, it has at times encountered difficulty when those who are not Jewish want to seek refuge there. And there's a whole situation, that has flared up now and then, has been fairly beneath the headlines in these last 3 or 4 years of African refugees in Israel, especially in Tel Aviv. It's very famous that one of Menachem Begin's first acts as prime minister was to welcome Vietnamese boat people, provide them with asylum. And so it also, we're now some 30 years from that first Russian Aliyah. It's so interesting that we call it the Russian Aliyah in Russia. It's about a third of the Jews are from Russia, a third of those who came to Israel from the Ukraine, and a third from all the other republics. As someone noted, that it could be interesting that everyone has kind of been okay being, the Russian Aliyah, the Russian Jews. It might be very interesting that people will start correcting you and not wanting to be known as Russian Jews anymore. They want to be known as the country they come from, because it's kind of an insult now to be associated with Russia for many of them. So Mati Friedman, terrific author and journalist, had a piece in Tablet called the New Ukrainian Aliyah, source number 12. There are about 200,000 people in Ukraine eligible for Israeli citizenship, a group that includes people married to Jews and anyone with a Jewish grandparent. He and his teams, talking about the Jewish Agency, have a list of 24,000 names of people who participated in Jewish Agency programs like summer camps and Sunday schools, and they're trying to figure out who everyone is. There's a tortured debate about whether Israel should focus efforts solely on refugees who are Jewish and about what we owe those who aren't. Some incoming Ukrainians are getting hassled or detained by clerks at the airport. The government has relaxed entry requirements for Olim and rented hotel rooms, but the real question is what happens after that. All right, so obviously, Israel is the homeland for the Jewish people, and we've seen and heard statements about this is exactly what Israel was created for. They were talking about, I think some of those a couple hundred refugees who landed in Israel, some were from Kishinev. And it was noted that, in 1903, there was a famous Kishinev pogrom. There was nowhere to go. And now the refugees from Kishinev were able to find asylum in the state of Israel. So, as Mati lays out, a lot of people eligible for citizenship. And it brings to mind the fact that that initial Soviet Union Aliyah had, hundreds of thousands of those who came in were not halachically Jewish. And it's something that's playing out in Israel today, that you have about 400,000 individuals from the former Soviet Union who were not halachically Jewish when they came, or were not halachically Jewish because of the children of marriages that are not fully Jewish, according to halacha. And you have people who are serving in the army and going to school and growing up and starting to date Israelis who know nothing about this until it comes time to get married. And where assimilation was always thought to be something that will never happen in Israel, in a country of Jews. It is not uncommon for people to all of a sudden be informed as their children are getting engaged that one of them isn't halachically Jewish. And this is something that's playing out in Israel with regard to how conversion works and what to do about the situation. But it's certainly something that is being that's in the background and that Mati Friedman alludes to. And this is something that they're trying to figure it out, because source number 13, fewer than 10% of Ukrainians who have entered Israel since the start of the war have been Jews. Israel's Interior Minister Ayel Sheket said Sunday, according to Haaretz. We will reach 15,000 Ukrainians in a month. The state of Israel needs to do more in order to bring Jews and those eligible for the law of return. We can't keep going at this rate. Things need to be planned, Sheket said. Israel has already tried to deport some of the Ukrainian refugees who are ineligible to immigrate under the law of return. They have entered the country so far, though refugees were ultimately allowed to enter. The government has collected monetary deposits from some non-Jewish refugees to ensure they do not stay in the country longer than necessary, a tactic some have criticized as inhumane in light of the circumstances. So, in terms of this refugee situation, Israel's response, it's not easy. I think that's certainly a complication for the state of Israel throughout its history, is the immigration of non-Jews to the country and how that plays out. Usually there's not generally that much interest, but in times of war like this, and with so many Ukrainians having relatives in Israel or even being technically eligible for Israeli citizenship, it certainly puts an additional pressure onto Israel in terms of how to handle this. And as you can see, maybe some mistakes may have already been made, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But in general, it's kind of, when looking into this issue from a Jewish law perspective, is there a halacha about accepting refugees? And the short answer is no. Obviously, we do what we can to protect people, but what's the obligation is something that's not so easy to define, especially once you're talking about these large numbers of individuals. Just like there's certain areas of Jewish law that running a state of Israel requires a whole new analysis, I think this is an example as well. On the individual level, if someone's in danger, someone's in need, you help them, doesn't matter who they are. But living in a more complicated world with larger numbers makes it a harder issue. Questions or comments on this front, helping all but the complications of the refugee issue?
Rabbi, on a
Yeah.
related topic, I, like everyone, is so concerned with the safety of everyone in Ukraine, especially Jews. But I've spoken to a number of Holocaust survivors that tell me how bad the Ukrainians were, worse than everyone. And they don't have that feeling for the non-Jews there. What is the Jewish approach on this issue?
Look, I think that type of an attitude is personal. You can't change people's feelings. I think that you also, it's hard to change people's feelings on the theoretical. It's one thing to say that, but what if that person then found themselves in a situation to help a Ukrainian who is right there in front of them in need? I think that it's definitely understandable, and I think that that's the example of of these Jewish institutions opening themselves up for everyone. In theory, yes, it's difficult, but life doesn't always work in theory. It's kind of and look, I think there are other situations along this line that can become complicated. Some people won't drive a German car, right? And some people don't have that issue. But I think, so I can understand people saying, let them all kill each other. Right. I think that's an emotional reaction. I don't, and people will say, look, the Talmud says you can kill a sixth of the people and it's not considered bad. Yes, I think that, but I think that type of response is more emotional. It's not productive, but I can't tell someone how to feel, especially if they've been directly impacted.
Thank you.
And so I just wanted to close with Natan Sharansky was at a Sheva Brachot, and it was recorded. It was written down what he had said. Just in terms of how the world has changed. Right, the world has changed. When I was a child, Jew was an unfortunate designation. No one envied us. But today, in the Ukrainian border, identifying as a Jew is the most fortunate circumstance. It describes those who have a place to go, where their family and entire nation is waiting for them on the other side. And it is. People want to be Jewish, that they have that type of assistance. And look, I think that getting back to the president being Jewish, and he calls on the free world, and he calls on NATO, he calls on America, and he calls on the Jewish people not to be silent, almost in a sense that a recognition for all those who don't like the Jews, we get things done. Even it's a situation where it's not easy to get things done, but I do think that Prime Minister Bennett going on a Shabbos was a springboard for looking at the issue of war in general, and recognizing that it's not just battle, it's not just when life is in danger, that can be considered war, as well as some of the reactions that we have to have in terms of how pikuach nefesh enters the conversation, how the value of freedom and fighting for freedom enters the conversation, as well as our responsibility and how to care for others, recognizing especially how with the state of Israel, this will be an issue, as has been throughout its history, of complexity and how to handle these refugees.